Fire Emblem Warriors Three Hopes is a fantastic companion piece to Three Houses, and any fan of the original game should absolutely give it a shot. Here's why. Fire Emblem Three Hopes is the second Fire Emblem Warriors game to come out, although it is a very different game. The first Fire Emblem Warriors was basically a warrior-style game that just had a lot of fan service in the form of here's all your favorite characters from different Fire Emblem games crammed together into one title with a story that kind of makes sense and more or less is just a justification to have all your favorites in one place to play. Three Hopes, on the other hand, is more of a companion piece to Three Houses. The basic premise of the game is a what-if scenario where instead of the main character of Three Houses, Byleth, meeting the three different lords of the titular Three Houses, we instead have this brand new character, Shez, with their own backstory and relation to Byleth that kind of sets the tone for how things play out a lot differently. And before diving into gameplay, one thing I want to touch on from a storytelling aspect is that I really think they did a great job with how things start to go a little differently from the original game's timeline. There's still certain major plot beats that are revisited and do play out similarly, but it's ultimately very differently and in a way that mostly makes logical sense, at least to me. I think one of the things that really pleasantly surprised me the most about Three Hopes is that while yes, the core combat is extremely different from traditional Fire Emblem gameplay, much of the story flow and structure of the game was basically the same thing as Three Houses. Three Houses messed with this whole idea of having the calendar where you're going between teaching lessons, doing school life stuff, and then doing actual main battle maps as the core gameplay part, whereas Three Hopes does a similar concept where there is a map you have to explore and handle, and in between that, you have a base camp where you do a lot of the day-to-day life stuff, many of which are clear parallels to mechanics from Three Houses. You can cook meals that give bonuses to chapter battles and help build bonds between characters. You can do training sessions where you advance characters' experience in different player classes. And there's expeditions, which are basically the exact same thing as the tea parties from the last game, where you can spend time answering questions with different characters to build a stronger bond, and if you do really well, get to have a nice awkward moment where you stare at them for a bit. There are other services around the base camp that you'll make use of over time that tie into the combat of the game as well, a blacksmith for upgrading weapons, a special trainer that unlocks additional abilities that are central to the warrior style formula, like expanding your special attack bar, and so on and so forth. But it's all these things put together that really does make Three Hopes just feel like, yeah, a direct spin-off of what Three Houses is. This isn't a Warriors game that just happens to have Fire Emblem storytelling as part of it. No, this is effectively a Fire Emblem game that just has a different core combat system. Now, as for that one big difference, look, this is absolutely a Warriors game, and while it has its own unique little spins that thematically draw a lot from Fire Emblem, if you know for a fact you don't like Warrior-style gameplay, this one doesn't do anything massively different enough that's going to change your mind. Now, if you've never played a Warriors game before, I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect for what people anticipate the core gameplay to be about that I do want to talk about a little bit. The core combat is, yes, very button mashy, very straightforward. Keep pressing buttons to do really cool moves until a bunch of enemies in front of you die, and that is still very true. However, really the actual challenge that comes from Warrior-style gameplay is less to do with that core combat and more to do with actually picking your battles. Choosing which characters to send to which enemy encampments, making sure that certain important NPCs are protected by other characters. It really has a lot more to do with battlefield decision making than it has to do with reflexive combat, because if all you ever do is focus on attacking the enemies that are directly in front of you, you're probably going to get a game over on the map pretty easily. Now, that being said, I will say that as far as difficulty is concerned, overall, Three Hopes is a little bit on the easier side, at least on the base difficulty. The earlier chapters actually provide a pretty healthy challenge, but as you get further and further into the game and you focus on a few specific characters, honestly, the power level that you're able to achieve gets so high that you'll just clean sweep through a lot of the ending phases of the game. So if you want to have a little bit more of that risk and challenge, you'll definitely be interested in turning up the difficulty to hard as soon as possible, and there's even a higher challenge with Maddening, which you'll unlock after your first playthrough. Again, aside from the traditional Warriors gameplay where you're going to be comboing enemies, building up stun gauges, and doing cool special moves to finish off waves of them at once, there are a number of Fire Emblem mechanics that have made their way in here as well. The weapon triangle again, where there is a prioritization over which kind of characters you want to use to handle which kind of enemies, as well as a durability system where characters can learn special moves that use up the durability of their weapons, limiting how often they can use them. All of this comes together into a combat system that, for me, was really satisfying. Is it necessarily the most in-depth action combat system you could hope for? No, not at all. But sometimes it's really fun to just press X to do cool moves, and at the same time, yeah, you still do have to put a little extra thought into it, because again, how are you going to divide your forces up across the map is ultimately a lot more important. Now, something that does really importantly tie into this is also the performance of the game. Warriors titles on Nintendo Switch have had a little bit of a back and forth with how smoothly they can run. In particular, the last game before this, Hyrule Warriors Warriors Age of Calamity had a lot of really bad frame drops, and for the most part, Three Hopes has been better. Docked gameplay runs at an unlocked frame rate that is unsteady, but it never really hits the same lows that Age of Calamity did, where you could actually count frame by frame for some scenes when things got really hectic. It seems to hug a lot closer to 30 most of the time, which is nice, though it is really bizarre when you have some moments that it'll jump up as high as 60 for a brief moment because you're looking at a single character in a corner, and then it drops back down. I kind of wish it just ran at a locked 30 to mean that kind of smoother look. Handheld gameplay, on the other hand, you are going to experience more frame drops more frequently. Still not as bad as Age of Calamity in my opinion, but it is noticeably worse than when playing in docked mode. So much so that while I generally prefer to play my games in handheld as often as possible, this one spent a little more time in docked mode than I usually do. So not perfect, but at least compared to Age of Calamity, it is an upgrade and a step in the right direction, and ultimately, it never gets low enough that it completely ruins the experience for me. Now, as for the storytelling, I don't want to go too in-depth on any specific plot spoiler stuff. I'd rather you guys experience that for yourselves, but the one thing I do really want to get across and talk about is I really like the way it was handled for the most part. There's a couple specific things that I'm not a fan of or I wish were handled a little better, but overall, especially for the kind of concept of being an alternate timeline to the original game, I really like what was done here. There's additional exploration of characters that were sometimes briefly mentioned in the original game that you never even saw that now make appearances in this one. I'll let you guys find out which. And there are some plot lines from the original game that were explored more heavily that maybe get glanced over a little bit in this one because they made that kind of trade. Something else that was really neat is support conversations. You know, this is one of the main ways that they really flesh out a lot of the characters and their relationships with one another, and it would have been really easy to just kind of walk over the same exact conversations from Three Houses and just adapt to the storyline, and it still happens with some relationships, but there's a little extra different direction going on for each of them that adds just a little more extra nuance and depth to the characters, more fully fleshing them out with this kind of combined experience of playing both games. Really though, the biggest thing I appreciate about this game's storyline is how each route actually feels like different routes. This happened a little bit in Three Houses where one route in particular was very different from the others, but the other ones had a lot of very similar samey events happen that were just a bit different because of which house you were aligned with. And that's not the case here. Each route really is exploring different houses' perspectives from the same war, and ultimately do end up going in slightly different directions for some of them based on which one you're aligned with. Because of this, each route you play through actually feels like an interesting, distinct thing, and not just simply okay, I'm doing this exact same battle again, but now featuring these characters, and that's cool, I guess. That was something that always really lightly bothered me about Three Houses, and I was really happy to see it not happen in Three Hopes. Really, I would say my only really big complaint about this game is it doesn't feel like there's really a proper endgame state. One of the things I really like about a lot of the Warrior collaboration games is that once you finish whatever main story there is, there's a lot of endgame content to explore where you can just keep doing more challenging maps, unlocking new abilities, maybe getting some additional hidden or secret characters, all kinds of stuff that keeps you wanting to do more and more after the story, which really isn't the case with Three Hopes. It's much more similar to the Three Houses structure where you play through a particular story's given route, and once that's done, you can do New Game Plus to play a different route or do the same one all over again. You can revisit older maps and play them on harder difficulties in order to give yourself more stuff to do, and there are goodies to unlock by doing multiple story route playthroughs back to back, but it just doesn't feel quite the same as hitting this kind of endgame state where here's all the stuff, go ahead and keep playing and find more things to unlock and do. Though to be fair, while this does bother me a little bit, the core story content you'll be playing through is pretty large. My first playthrough with Golden Deer took a little over 30 hours, and that was me also kind of blitzing through some parts of it. I could easily imagine it taking more like 35 or even 40 for a lot of people, and once you've done that, yeah, you're going to be able to go through some of the new routes faster, but because a lot of those story elements are new and different, you're still going to take your time with a lot of it, leading to a total playtime across all three routes being pretty sizable. One other thing that didn't bother me too much, but I know is a potential big loss for some fans, is that while this game does still have supports like in most Fire Emblem games, it does not have the series tradition of having paired endings. Supports help flesh out characters and strengthen their teamwork, but you're never going to see any kind of epilogue story of how two characters fall in love or live out their lives together after the main story's events. Which I'll admit, I did feel a little sad once I realized that was missing, but it's not something that really destroyed the rest of the game for me. But I do know for sure there's going to be some of you out there that really want to have that aspect of the game in there, and sadly, it's just not. Really, my main thought walking away from Three Hopes is that if you enjoyed Three Houses, if you enjoyed the storytelling Three Houses and the characters in it, and you want more of that regardless of what the core gameplay is, Three Hopes is something that you should absolutely jump into as soon as possible. If gameplay is all you care about and you just want another strategy RPG and you don't really care for Warriors gameplay, then yeah, this isn't going to be anything that changes your mind. But if you just want more story and you're willing to give a different gameplay style a shot, it is absolutely worth it.